I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities in Music. On this podcast, Tom and I discuss an arsenal of topics pertaining to modern music, including artist deep dives and monthly and annual new music wrap-ups. Before we get started, you can help support Velocities in Music. Subscribe to Velocities in Music on your favorite podcasting device to automatically get our latest podcast episodes sent to your device for your listening pleasure. Also, Velocities in Music does not want your money. We also don't want to introduce any ads into this podcast yet. Right now, all we want is for you to share Velocities in Music with friends or family whom you think would benefit from joining in on the music discussion Tom and I are attempting to create in each podcast episode. Tom.
Yes.
We've done 80s Metallica.
Yes.
We've done 90s Metallica.
Mm-hmm.
What's left?
Well, we got the 2000s and the 2010s, bringing us up to today.
I think that means we have to start with Saint Anger.
Yes.
2003, Metallica at their height.
Yes.
At their they're the best album that they have ever released. You can't even let me get away with saying that. I can't believe that you're letting that just awkward silence fill the time.
Saint Anger. Oh boy, so, how do we even...
Well, man. I think you start with addressing the fact, if we're going to do a Metallica deep dive, part 3 of our Metallica series, to conclude the Metallica escapade.
Yes.
With the 2000s and 2010 Metallica albums. There's three albums that we have to cover today. Saint Anger, which came out in 2003, 2008's Death Magnetic, and then 2016, just a month ago, Metallica dropped their most recent album, Hardwired to Self-Destruct.
Yes.
A couple other little releases in there that Tom will address. But Saint Anger, you know, kind of the 90s podcast, I felt was kind of like watching a band at their peak. It was like watching a train crash.
Yes.
Just slowly.
Yeah.
And over the course of a decade, you know, they kind of round out the end of the 90s. And the Load and Reload just weren't that great. Got them a ton of new fans.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Opened them up to a whole new audience, took over the radio airwaves. I mean, they were huge.
Right. They were huge. And as you said, they kind of were the birth of butt rock. And in any case, we even heard some new metal starting to come out in some of the tracks on Reload.
Yes.
I'm going to go out on a limb here to kick off Saint Anger.
Okay.
I'm going to say that Saint Anger is a new metal record. New metal at this point in time. Has already hit the scenes pretty big. Linkin Park, Limp Bizkit,
yes,
Godsmack, many other bands in this genre. Which I will admit, when I was 12 in the year 2000, I was very into a lot of those bands.
Yeah.
But then, you know, I met Tom and Tom wisened me up, you know, on like better bands to listen to. And then I spent my time listening to those bands instead of any of these shitty new metal bands. And Metallica, for some reason, while they have this huge listener base and really can dictate the collective rock audience's taste in music. They really have that power, which is extraordinary.
Yes.
Very few bands ever achieve that. And maybe no band in the same vein as Metallica or at the same level of influence, because talk about a devoted fan base.
Oh, of course.
Why they feel at all pressured into meeting any of the standards of rock music.
I have no idea.
It doesn't make any sense. You would think that you could just innovate and that would be the direction that rock music goes. But instead, for whatever reason, in 2003, you have a shift toward new metal, which is already a pretty established and quite candidly, you had to be living under a rock to see that genre wasn't going to stick around for too much longer.
Yeah. It was going to fizzle out.
So historical context, Tom.
So, yep, Saint Anger. Well, this album, the making of it, is pretty well documented in a film called Some Kind of Monster, which Jake, you and I actually watched in preparation of this podcast.
Drinking Fade to Black beer.
Yeah, it was a great
quite
time.
Apropos.
It was. So if you haven't seen that film, I highly recommend it if you're at all interested. And it's interesting that it happens to document what will probably historically go down as Metallica's worst record, because it was a very shaky time for the band. I mean, it's a miracle that they continued as a band. And I think that context with Saint Anger is very important. They went into a studio, the Presidio, which they began the writing and recording sessions for Saint Anger, and then James Hetfield went into rehab. And he was in rehab for pretty much a full year. and the rest of the band barely had contact with him. I forgot to mention right before that, Jason Newsted left the band.
Yeah, their bassist since Injustice for All.
A lot of the world hated them personally, particularly Lars, for taking on the Napster giant and trying to stop illegal file sharing and music downloading, which, looking back on that time, I think that Lars really got a lot of crap for that he did not deserve.
I think in that documentary he even said someone had to do that.
Yeah, someone had to be the fall guy and stand up against
and Metallica
it.
had been burned by that on previous record releases.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I remember at the time thinking, yeah, those guys are a bunch of assholes. But really, were they? Is that bad of a thing to it's tough to say now. We did the whole "Should Music Be Free" topic podcast a long time ago at this point, and discussed many of these things. But I do feel like they probably got unfairly criticized for that.
Yep. So after that onslaught, and Jason Newsted leaving the band effectively because he wanted to also work in his band Echo Brain, his side project, which was gaining momentum, and essentially James was very controlling and didn't want him to do that.
Well, and let's
gave him
face
an
it,
ultimatum.
They treated that dude like shit.
Yeah, they did. What was his incentive to stick around?
Well, yeah, he had made a ton of money off of the huge success of Black Album, Load and Reload. He had made a ton of money. He had played a ton of great music and arguably one of the best rock bands of all time. And he didn't need to go through any of that drama. If you watch that documentary, these guys, they had some issues. And I could totally understand why Jason's like, I'm out, have fun with all that.
Right. And it really captures them at their absolute lowest point.
Absolutely.
For that reason. Because they had to go through all that hell with each other to come back out of it the other side. And the reason that this is important is because, yes, Saint Anger, let's just get it out there. It's a pretty terrible album. It's not good. It's rough. And we'll get into musically why that is. But I want to set this up by saying I think it was crucial for them to make this. Whatever it ended up being, they had to see this project through to the end and release it if they wanted to become... if they wanted to stay a band at all. And if you don't understand that, then you just don't understand interpersonal relationships. You don't understand band dynamics, because there's something cathartic. There's something that lifts the weight of actually releasing an album. And even if it's not good, even if it's not your best work, you have to put it behind you. And the only way to bring closure to a situation like that is to complete something. Even if it's not something that's your best work, even if it's not something you're overly proud of, if you just abandon it, then you don't bring closure to anything. So they had to do that. But in doing so, they switched studios. James Hetfield went to rehab. They had a lot of problems. They had a therapist who was with them at almost all times, it seems like, got very involved with the band's activities, had to go through, a lot of, addressing their issues between them, their issues with past band members like Dave Mustaine and Jason Newsted. They had to address all of these things. So Saint Anger, how did that actually play into it as an album? Well, in that need to actually release something, it definitely feels like they cut a lot of corners. And I think what's a real shame is that they try to justify it. They try to excuse how bad this sounds. And there's some key things there. First off, there's the drum sound and the overall production. Now, these guys came out of the 90s making some of the most well-produced studio-sounding rock albums that had probably ever been made. And they come into Saint Anger, and everything sounds muddled. The drums sound like crap. There's not much definition. The bass drum just sounds slappy. And the snare drum, Lars deliberately shut off his snare because he, I guess, accidentally turned it off one day and liked how it sounds. So everything has, all the snare drum hits, like every freaking snare drum hit on this album has this metal ping to it that just sounds abrasive and awful. And they say they wanted to go for a raw sound. I'm like, well, is that really just your way of excusing yourself for going for a bad sound and allowing it to sound bad? It definitely sounds like an excuse to me. From there also, James's vocals are just not up to par here. Now, if you watch the film, you see him working through a lot of the vocals with the rest of the band, which is a collaborative process he wasn't really used to on past albums. And he's also just recording these scratch takes there in the room with the rest of the band. Which is
their whole recording process was different on Saint Anger.
Yeah.
Whereas before, each member of the band would kind of on their own come up with different ideas for songs, and particularly Lars and James would get together and maybe craft out a few tracks and then bring those tracks into the studio, record, and fully envelop them into what they actually become on the recordings. Here, they were writing an album from scratch in the studio, in fragmented recording sessions between different periods of really a band's life, because they're arguably their frontman James Hetfield went and left for a full year to go to rehab. And then came back and then severely limited the hours that they were working. And keep in mind, throughout this, they didn't have an actual bassist in the band. Bob Rock, their producer, was playing the role of the bass player. And so he had a very extensive hand in the collaborative process and songwriting process. And keep in mind, Bob Rock was not an easy man to work with as a producer, and coupling that with actually giving him songwriting takes on the album. I mean, it just complicated the matters further. This was a strenuous process for the band to go to. I think, Tom, Metallica fans across the world hated this record. Yeah. And I wonder if, and hear me out. I'm going to say some things here, and I want you to listen and then tell me I'm full of shit, because I expect that. Okay. I think that they actually went for something here, and while I don't like the end result, I have to applaud them for going for it, because this is, I have to say, a very cohesive sounding record. Now, I don't like the sound, I don't like the output, but I do appreciate the fact that they actually went for something where load and reload were just all over the place. I mean, just it was a buffet, whatever they wanted. Yeah. Saint Anger is not that at all. It's a very, very focused sound around a very raw production style, very aggressive and loud songwriting tactics, and really trying to make their instrumental performances be the most grating, the most aggressive, agitating thing that you can hear. And they were trying to set a new sound with that within kind of the context of a new metal sound. Yeah. And what that means is an extensive focus around a verse-chorus format and absolutely no guitar solos. Ugh. Kirk Hammett, actually in the Some Kind of Monster documentary, says, if we don't do guitar solos on this record, doesn't that paint us into a corner, or paint this into like this time period forever? That's what makes this cemented in this certain time period. Because Lars is saying, well, I don't want to do guitar solos because it's basically what we've always done, and that puts it in a certain style. And Kirk's let's just get rid of our most defining characteristic as a band. You have Kirk Hammett in a band. God, the guy was born to solo. What are you thinking? But I think that Kirk had a really good point. What is even more of a shame about this is, as I mentioned, they helped give birth to the new metal genre. The whole point is that they are a powerful enough band, a popular enough band, that they will pull listeners with them. But instead, at this point in their career, because of the interpersonal troubles that they're having, and because Jason left the band, they're so insecure as a band that they are afraid to innovate. They are afraid to actually try something new. So instead, they feel enslaved by the new metal movement that they helped create. And not only that, to build on what you just said, because you hit the nail on the head, they overcommitted. They wanted to create something like a really cohesive new sound that they were going for, but they overcommitted. They went, because they were so insecure and lacked that inspiration, they overcommitted to the sound over songwriting. Yes. And when you first turn on the first song on this record, Frantic, which is arguably the best song on this record. Yeah, I think so. It just has that killer guitar riff, main guitar riff on, and that just kind of lead in to that really terrible chorus about a minute and a half into the song. My lifestyle determines my death style. My lifestyle determines my death style. you hear that the my lifestyle determines my death style. I mean, right there, you just know that you're in for just a bag of garbage. It's an all-time low.
Which in the film, you see that's a line that Kirk throws out there, and he's not even saying it seriously, and Lars laughs at it. And then they end up using it
on their best track.
Line, right?
On their best track, and so that song, it's not really a bad song. It's almost 6 minutes long. It goes into the title track, Saint Anger, which is just this brutal attack on the ears. You have these really loud guitar parts. It cuts into this like extended bridge, and then comes back to the pre-chorus chorus, which isn't that great. It has that new metal. We'll flush it out. Yeah, it's not that great. Then the title track from the documentary, Some Kind of Monster, and then Tom, one of your arguably favorite tracks.
Dirty Window. It's not a bag of garbage. It's got some decent moments.
But here's the deal. I can't really go on much further defending this album, because at that point, once you're a couple tracks in the album, you've actually heard all of the ideas on the record.
And presented in the best way that they're going to be presented the entire album.
Right, and all of that is a taste thing. And Metallica went for a certain sound, and they somehow brainwashed themselves in their little echo chamber to agree that was a good sound, when it really wasn't. I mean, they should have done some user testing of some sort to try to get some outside feedback. And I think Lars's dad actually told them it was junk at one point in time.
He did.
But they're just in this echo chamber. They're Metallica. They're gods. The people that they bring in that are all paid by the band, and they all don't want to hurt Metallica's feelings or make Metallica not...
Worst thing you could do.
Yeah, and so they're not telling them the truth. These guys literally never hear the truth about the shit that they're creating.
That's why I will always work on music with you, Jake, because you tell me when I do something shitty. You have to have it. As an artist, you can't surround yourself with yes men. It's the worst thing you could do.
Like a vindicated jerk right now.
You call me out on my bullshit, man, and I appreciate it. But no one was really there to do that with Metallica. Now, you talked about their collaborative process. We talked about how the other members of the band were contributing to lyrics, and everyone was commenting on what everyone else was doing. Everyone was in the same room together, piecing things together. That is how you save a relationship. It's not how you make good music.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right.
Or at least it's not the way Metallica makes good music.
Right.
The reason they had made so many good things in the past is because James and Lars would go off on their own and work.
Genius.
Yes, Kirk would go off on his own and develop some stuff, and then they'd come together. Every band has a different way of doing things. Some are more democracies, some are more dictatorships. I feel like Metallica is more of like an oligarchy or something. It's an odd combination, but that band dynamic... that's the thing. If we wanted to get any more Metallica after this is the album they had to make. And it's about the process.
Right. And another thing that they did on this record that's a little bit different than what they've done previously is these songs are very multi-segmented. And each of the songs are built on repetition. Each song is built from plugging sections together like Legos.
Yeah.
Like different Lego bricks in a tower of Legos. Each section is a single riff or beat or vocal melody repeated about 4 times, and then it moves on to the next section. So what I find when I listen to this record is that usually within a track there's like certain parts that I'm like, oh, that's a really neat idea. Yeah. And then they'll just beat it to death, and then they'll move on to this next little part, and then it's just all these segments together. And some of the segments just suck, and some of them are all right. But the problem is that it's so repetitive. They use the same formula on every single track that you almost can't discern the different tracks. This album honestly doesn't have a lot to offer most listeners, I would say. Even the tracks that we tried to say some positive things about, keep in mind, all of those are in the first 4 tracks of the record.
Yeah.
And that is because at that point, as you're listening to this record straight through, you haven't gotten sick of those ideas yet. Had you put those tracks at the end of the album, we would be talking about the first 4 tracks anyways.
Exactly. I've had the same thought as well. But oh my gosh, when you get to track 5, Invisible Kid,
it's bad.
That song is crap.
It's bad.
That song is awful. That sung like soft chorus part. Is so bad. And James' vocals, not only are the lyrics bad, not only is his performance not polished, because, I mentioned that you see him singing these takes in the studio with everyone else there in the room, just kind of going for it. And you watch the film and then you listen to the album and you're like, wait, that sounds like exactly the one that I saw him doing in the film, because they basically keep his scratch vocals. He doesn't go back and reperform them and polish them and do proper layers and produce them. They also made no effort to mix his vocals. They just sit awkwardly on top and they don't blend with anything. It's just...
No, they gotta be raw.
That's just the way you excuse bad production, I guess.
Now, and while the band did go on to defend what they did with Saint Anger, they quit playing this. They did go on a world tour after this record was released. They did get a new bassist.
Yeah, Robert Trujillo, who's terrific.
Yeah, he's very good. I think they did some auditions, and that's captured in some kind of Monster, the DVD. But at the end of the tour, that's really the last time you see the bulk of the Saint Anger music played live. And now I don't even think that they play any of the songs live anymore.
No, not really.
I think by the time that Death Magnetic rolls out in 2008, they've all but closed the books on Saint Anger, whereas every other Metallica record, you see tracks show up in their set lists. You don't really see Saint Anger show up in their set lists anymore. That kind of sent the message, I think, when fans, just all their fans, the old faction of fans and their newer 90s faction of fans, when everyone hates your new record, you probably put out a bad record.
Yeah.
I'm glad they got the message.
Yeah,
that was bad. Never do that again. So what happens in between 2003 and 2008? 5 years in between those records?
Yeah, they start doing shows again. I think they start to settle into a new band dynamic with Robert coming into the group. And we saw when we were talking about the Beatles in our Beatles deep dive, during the Let It Be sessions when pretty much all of them wanted to kill each other, and then Billy Preston came in and they said they felt like they had to be on their best behavior because there was a guest there, right? I feel like to an extent that's probably what happened with Robert joining the band. All of a sudden there's a fresh new face. They've kind of put this crap behind them. They're ready to start fresh. They start doing some new shows, which helps bring some more energy to them. So, they take a little bit of time still, though, to release Death Magnetic, which comes out in September of 2008, 5 years after Saint Anger.
I remember when this came out. I remember we were playing disc golf the day it came out.
Yeah.
And you put it on and you were like, this album it's great. And you were thrilled.
I was.
Because it was a return to form.
And now you know why.
Yeah.
Because I was waiting my whole life for this.
Yeah.
I started listening to them when I was 7 and Load came out, and they never put out anything that sounded anything like their early work. And then Death Magnetic comes out, and the closest thing I could compare it to was And Justice for All. It's hard hitting. It's got complex song structures again. It's just got this relentlessly punchy, aggressive production, which historically a lot of people actually hate the production and mastering on Death Magnetic because it is overly compressed to the point of clipping. But man, you can't deny the songs on this album. For me, I think that people were kind of hot or cold on this one. I thought it was great. I still, every time I come back to it, just love listening to this album. I think it's got a lot to offer. From the very beginning, that was just your life. Really good, hard-hitting song.
Immediately, the thrash metal returns.
Right.
Finally.
They have the thrashiness in the drums and the guitar. You also hear James's vocals being mixed properly. They're a little lower in the mix.
It's not a pop song.
Yeah.
It's rock music.
And
it's rock music, so let's mix him a little bit down and let him scream a little more.
Yes, more grit, which just supports the guitars in the mix.
That song's great.
It's terrific. Really, the first 4 tracks on here I absolutely love. But in particular...
We got to talk about Broken, Beat, and Scarred.
Okay.
That song, I think, is up there with best Metallica songs.
See, tracks 2 and 3, The End of the Line and Broken, Beat, and Scarred, are both up there for me.
I think Broken, Beat, and Scarred is just genius. The main guitar riff with the vocals is just a perfect combo, and I think that one of the things that song in particular proves, but all of Death Magnetic really makes a statement, is, back in the my favorite time, which was Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets.
Yeah.
James's vocals weren't that great back then. Like, he was
right.
he performed in a way that made really convincing performances and added to his vocals certainly passed the vocal test. They added to the overall sound of the album, but like, to be a significant contributor, we never heard that until the music just kind of fell away and all that you had was James' vocals.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's kind of like he took his overzealous vocals back a notch. He's back to the screaming, but he's able to do some more things. He's more versatile. He's mixed correctly, so there's more space for him to perform. Man, does he just crush it on Death Magnetic.
And I think his lyrics are better too.
I agree with that.
The end of the line, that's one of the highlights for me lyrically, kind of paints this picture of a self-destructive rock star. And that's actually where the term Death Magnetic comes from. It's inspired by people such as Lane Staley, who kind of went on these self-destructive paths, and he saw a lot of that happen throughout his life, the 25 years in the rock world.
Risked that himself.
Right, he came very close to it. I mean, he had a lot of drug problems, and he'd cleaned up and was looking at it from a different perspective. But I just feel like on that song, the lyrics, you get so much better imagery, and it's much more evocative. It makes you think, and he's just being much more literary with it.
Scorch, kill the light, incinerate celebrity, rebar, butchery, call my amputee, bloodline, redefine, death contagious deity.
From there, though, the first 4 tracks, then coming out of Broken, Beat, and Scarred, The Day That Never Comes, which is another pretty long track.
It's a
just
ballad.
about 8 minutes. Yeah, it starts as kind of a ballad. Actually has a very similar structure to 1.
Yep.
Also track 4, On and Justice for All,
Well,
another
they've
similarity.
They've done this very quite a few times at this point.
Yeah, actually,
but
Fade
the
to Black.
But the formula works very well.
It does. By the time you get to that point in the album, you're ready for it to be slowed down a bit. They have a nice, clean guitar riff, but then, man, halfway through that track, it just goes nuts.
Yeah, just a thrashy blitz.
And that riff is so intense, so fast.
Mm-hmm.
From there, I feel like the album loses momentum a little bit. I really like tracks 5 and 6, All Nightmare Long and Cyanide.
Yeah.
But I feel like they're not stylistically all that different from the first 4 tracks, and also not quite as good. I still think they're quite good, though. The Unforgiven 3, track 7. What are your thoughts on that one? We've got the threequel of the Unforgiven trilogy.
The first Unforgiven's great.
Yeah.
On Black Album. The Unforgiven 2 did not need to ever exist. It's awful. It's an awful song. It's one of my least favorite songs.
Yeah.
In Metallica's catalog. And it's hard because, like, I kind of lump all of Saint Anger into like 1 or 2 tracks.
Yeah.
Because, and I'll be the first to admit, like, that album was painful to listen to. I've listened to it 3 times straight through, and I never intend to listen to it again in my life.
Yep.
Ever.
Same here.
Along with The House That Jack Built. I'll never listen to that again in my life. But I think that this version of The Unforgiven actually is kind of a nice piece just because it fits so contextually well in Death Magnetic as a record. You have the piano start and the string and horn backings, and it has this, just absolutely huge build into this monumental solo, which I think that the album needed that break. Because this album is loud. This album is a guitar heavy, like punch in the face. They're like a true return to form for Metallica, from a songwriting perspective. And I think that this album needed that song. So I think I give it extra props for that. As far as like the whole sequel thing, I don't really care.
Yeah. It does seem kind of inconsequential, right? It's just a
Your thoughts,
it's just a labeling thing. I like that song, all right, but it's probably my least favorite on the album.
Okay.
I just don't think it carries a whole lot. I think Coming Back Into the Judas Kiss is a strong track.
Old school, man.
Yep. But then the 2 closing tracks again, Suicide and Redemption and My Apocalypse.
Great instrumental.
It is a great instrumental, but at that point you've already been listening for an hour.
Right, but that like as a 10-minute instrumental, that's one of my track picks on this record.
Is it? Okay, cool.
To me, it's the first 4 tracks and then Suicide and Redemption. I might like be willing to cut maybe even. I would agree. I think you could cut maybe 3 songs in there.
Yeah.
They went back to the formula of having the thrashy closer with My Apocalypse, a 5-minute song.
Shorter track.
I'm not really sure what that adds to the album. And while I really like the Judas Kiss, and as I said, I thought the Unforgiven 2 or Unforgiven 3 has a part on this record, you probably could have cut a lot of that out. This record's almost 75 minutes long.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to be 75 minutes long. In fact, my biggest complaint about this is that it's unjustifiably long.
As is the way with Metallica, in the
and I don't think they'll ever
2000s.
change.
No,
I don't think they'll
no.
ever change at this point. That's
Right.
just what fans have come to expect.
Right.
And this album did catch a lot of flack from the over compression of the mixing, and really I think that the clipping is really noticeable when you're listening to this on nice headphones.
Yeah.
Which Tom and I try to listen to most of the music for the podcast on our now 4 or 5 year old headphones.
Yeah, mine are starting to fray, man. I've had them for 5 years.
Yeah. They're great Sennheisers, right? But they highlight some of the issues that are on this album.
Of course.
And I will say, the more that I paid attention to it, the more it bothered me. I really wish that I could hear this album in its full glory of like a full production. And it's important to note that Bob Rock did not produce this record.
Yes, this was
Rick Rubin produced this record, and I don't know what the hell went wrong with the mixing. It's like this it's the same thing as Injustice for All.
Yeah.
You just like what they do, just drop the ball on the mixing.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the deal. It doesn't bother me as much because I just think the ideas in the songs are strong enough to make up for it.
I completely agree with you.
I think the bigger issue and the reason people hate it is because it's so unforgivably easy to avoid.
Yes.
There's just no reason for it.
Yeah. The real problem that more people should pay attention to is just the absolute lack of a need to be 75 minutes long.
Yes.
That's the thing people should be complaining about.
But a lot of times they're not. A lot of times it's nitpicky production stuff.
Right.
So, coming out of Death Magnetic, we go into 2011. We're going to stop there for a short time. And we have Lulu, which is a collaboration with Lou Reed. And this project started because Lou Reed and Metallica played together at an awards ceremony and had fun working together and decided to pursue that. And really it kind of started as Metallica reworking some unfinished Lou Reed songs, and I think Metallica came in with some instrumental ideas. And this was just an odd, unexpected project. So here's how I'd like to preface this album, Jake. Jake, you're a fan of steak, right?
Sometimes.
You like eating steak?
Depends on the cut.
Nice filet mignon. Does that sound good?
I'm more of a T-bone.
You're more of a T-bone guy. Okay, so I'm gonna cook you a T-bone steak.
Oh, yeah,
I'm gonna grill it for you. It's gonna be it's gonna be a perfect medium. Is that how you like your steaks?
Medium rare. I like a little blood.
You like
in my steak.
This is gonna be a perfect medium rare.
Thanks,
and
buddy.
guess what? I'm gonna saute some onions.
God.
And I'm gonna roast some garlic.
Oh, this is getting
I'm
sensual.
I'm gonna put this right on your T-bone
Tom,
steak.
my wife doesn't talk this dirty to me.
And then I'm not done yet, man.
Oh, buddy.
And then you know what I'm gonna do? I've got a piece of German chocolate cheesecake, and it is delectable. It is rich. It is dense. You almost have to cut it with a knife. This piece of cheesecake is so dense. And it's going to be on this nice fancy china plate right next to your T-bone steak that's just got a little bit of red oozing out of it with those roasted garlic and sauteed onions on it, right? And so that's your meal. But you know what? Why waste time?
It's all going to the same place.
Why waste time? Let's just jam that cheesecake right on top of that T-bone steak. I'm just going to mash it in there. I'm just going to mash it in, and you're going to have that overpowering garlic just mixed with this chocolate flavor.
You guys got to know the facial expressions Tom's giving me right now.
You're going to cut into that baby. And you're going to the heat from the steak is going to melt the chocolate. And you know, the coolness of the chocolate is going to make some of that blood and steak juice congeal, and it's all going to mix together, and it's just going to look like a mess, and I'm going to make you eat it like that. And you're going to wish you're going to wish to God that I hadn't jammed those two things together in the same place. Well, guess what? I don't care which one is which, but one of those two things is Lou Reed and one of those two things is Metallica. And that concoction is the album Lulu. It's something that is two very beautiful, genius things coming together that just never should have been put together. To me, it's almost as simple as that, because I listen to a lot of the musical ideas here, and I think that what Metallica is doing is actually some of the most experimental, innovative stuff that they've made.
You gotta give them credit for it.
It's
a
lot of dynamics.
Like post-metal. They're like playing their like post-metal stuff, and Lou Reed's doing his thing. And it just, the problem is well, it sounds like super creepy at times, and I guess that's kind of intriguing and alluring. I mean, I am a fan of swans.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't ever seem to like click. And while there's, again, with like a lot of Metallica's albums that I just don't like, there's parts that I think are really good. And in Lulu, there was parts that I thought were really good, but overall it just didn't click.
Yeah. Which now, to their credit, one thing that helps the listening experience for me is this is loosely like he was writing the lyrical ideas inspired by a 19th century German playwright and a couple of his plays in particular. And if you're familiar at all, which I don't expect everyone to be, but if you're familiar at all with 19th century German theater, it's going to be some kind of dark, avant-garde, weird stuff. And when you combine that with the name of the album, Lulu, and the cover of the album, which is this like bust of a mannequin with no arms, and Lulu's written in blood, and it's pretty dark, and you compare that with a lot of the lyrics here, which are kind of painting the picture of this female character. It doesn't really come together to make a very cohesive narrative to me, but a lot of the imagery is still makes sense together. So when you think about it from that perspective, it makes it a little bit better, and it makes the craziness a little bit more justified. I will actually say I think I enjoy this more than most people. I would listen to this album over Saint Anger any day.
Yeah. And didn't this go down as like one of the worst records
one of the worst.
Time?
It got lambasted, man. I think it had like a 45 on Metacritic.
Oh.
And a lot of critics were calling it one of the worst albums of all time. Period. Not just like of the year, not of the decade, of ever.
That seems a little harsh.
I think it is a little harsh.
I mean,
especially
clearly
like
they didn't listen to Saint Anger.
Right. So, I think the instrumentals are fantastic on this album. You have some really cool guitar riffs. Iced Honey, for example, has a great guitar riff.
You can't put a butterfly in a jar. If the effort's too mine, no matter who you are, you can't catch the moon.
I actually think the closing track, Junior Dad, that's actually one moment where I think the collaboration works. It's a really kind of soft, clean, smooth-moving guitar progression, and Lou Reed steps back a little bit and is a little bit calmer there, rather than his more drunken rant approach that's on the rest of the album. So I think this album has its moments, but I think for a lot of people, it's just two sides that aren't good to stomach. I think Lou Reed fans hated the Metallica bits, and Metallica fans hated the Lou Reed bits.
And for Metallica's contribution, it's impossible to bring along any of Metallica's fan base and have them support Lulu, because they didn't play like Metallica at all.
Right.
So how could they possibly like it?
Yeah, and how could it work? So a lot of people hated Lou Reed for it. He got like death threats from Metallica fans. It's stupid. Yeah, it's bad.
And he died in 2013.
Yeah, he that was the last thing he put out before he died, which is kind of a shame. But I mean, to me, it doesn't mar the guy's legacy. The guy was a genius. He left his mark on music history, and maybe it's a collaboration that didn't need to happen, but I think it does have some redeeming moments.
Tom, last month Metallica dropped a double album. It's only
you have to laugh.
It's only about a minute longer than any of their previous 4 albums, but
it's shorter than Load.
Yeah, right. But it's a double album. Album.
Yes.
Hardwired to Self-Destruct. 8 years between Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self-Destruct. And they've actually been working on this album for, I think, like 5 years.
Yeah.
Since, like, right when Lulu was finished, they've really had this album, like, at least, like, reports are coming out about, I think Robert even said that, that it sounds a lot like the stuff that they were doing on Death Magnetic, just really a continuation.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly, I have no idea what the holdup was. I don't know if that's even been fully released yet.
I think they just take a while. I think they have other things going on, and
right, like they're the head of this genre. They're big names in music. They have a lot of obligations. They all have families. I totally get that. So I think Metallica fans are thrilled that Metallica finally released another album. And Tom, I'm interested in your take. We really haven't talked about Hardwired to Self-Destruct very much. Maybe just here and there.
Yeah.
In fact, early on, which I'll admit, I listened to this actually before I think I had the full context of Metallica, like a really decent understanding of their 90s and Insane Anger before I really understood this record. And this one, I got to say, it's so long, and I would even say kind of jumps around in style a little bit.
It does.
That it was almost hard for me to grasp at first. This one took some real effort to try to get a high-level understanding of what the sound that they were going for on Hardwired to Self-Destruct. It's a Metallica record. It sounds like Metallica.
Unmistakably.
How would you describe it? I mean, I'm really curious. Let's just dive into the sound of Hardwired.
Sure. So first off, I appreciate the fact that they made this a double album. It's a small thing.
It's a gesture.
It is.
It's like President Obama like calling Mount McKinley, like saying, no, this is Denali. This is Mount Denali. It's really what it is. It's the same mountain. It's just a name, but it's accurate.
Right. Right. Because really everything they put out since 1996 should have been a double album, it feels like. But I actually appreciate it because it's just an organizational thing. It allows you to chunk it more and it makes it seem less overwhelming. So I like that. Now, this album, to me, in sound, first time I listened to it, I thought this sounds like an even mix of Death Magnetic and Reload. And I still feel like that pretty strongly, but I'm hearing bits of other things in there too. Actually, that's what I thought once I got to the end of the album. But after the first track, the title track, kind of Hardwired, I was like, that riff sounds like it came from Kill 'Em All.
Could have been, could have been straight off Death Magnetic, which is just the overall production of the track.
But also, what I love about the opening track, it's the second shortest song they've ever written. Motor Breath is the only song shorter than that they've ever put out. And they accomplish so much in that song.
Yeah.
It covers so much ground in just over 3 minutes. I think it's a terrific opener.
So honestly, it shows that they're still growing as songwriters.
Right. And it piqued my interest. It got me hooked right away. This album, so I mentioned Death Magnetic and Reload. The reason for that is I think that the production style, the composition style, the way they're piecing these songs together sounds a lot like Death Magnetic. It has a similar aesthetic. But the way that the vocals and the low dynamic portions are mixed in sound like Reload sometimes, especially in James' more clean vocal performances on some of the tracks. Sound a little more like hard rock than your typical thrash metal.
Yes. I agree. I think that Hardwired to Self-Destruct seems to be the exact middle of the Venn diagram between Metallica's 80s and 90s work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, one thing that I think is key to understand that about Hardwired to Self-Destruct that really started, and we mentioned this in the 90s podcast about Black Album, is there is just a huge emphasis on extremely catchy choruses.
Yeah.
Both in song structure, but also in the vocal performances and really in the instrumentation as well. All of these songs seem to be built around the chorus. Some more blatantly than others. In others, I think they mask it a little bit with just focusing on other instrumentals going on at the same time. But some of the choruses are more stripped down, and it is a pop chorus in there. And James performs it as such. I think that his vocals are a little bit more higher pitched on this record. He's singing, but it's not like the singing that he did back in the 90s that I hated. It's more of like a fit the style sort of singing, but it's produced. I mean, his vocals are very produced on this record. And oftentimes you have harmonies in there, which is something that is relatively new. They've focused a lot on keeping the edge and letting their thrash roots come out. And I think that, but overall, the songwriting is a significant step away from the progressivism of Death Magnetic.
Yeah.
So it is like that they are really trying to blend. They are trying to make the quintessential Metallica record. They're trying to make a record that takes the band forward while still appeasing all of their fan base.
Yeah.
And honestly, they hit it out of the park.
They really did.
They really just it's very clear after listening to this. I think I've listened to this album like 4 or 5 times now, straight through, and then track highlights. They had a goal and they went for it, and man, did they crush it.
Well, I'd still say that I think I like Death Magnetic a little bit better. What I will say about Hardwired to Self-Destruct that you can't say about Death Magnetic and you can't say about Load or Reload is that unlike Load and Reload, these songs actually make sense together.
Yep.
They work really well together. They sound good together. They flow. They make sense on the same album. But also, unlike Death Magnetic, they just have a lot more variety. They offer a lot more sides. Track 5, Dream No More, has these vocal harmonies in the verse that sound a lot like Slither from Reload. You have the intro to Here Comes Revenge on the last half. That intro sounds almost exactly like the intro to Harvester of Sorrow off of And Justice for All. You have Moth into Flame, track 4, which sounds similar and even has a similar lyrical theme to the driving track 2, Into the Line from Death Magnetic. You know, that inability to resist temptation and self-destructive patterns. That there's a lot of those themes on here, musically, lyrically. Confusion, the first track on disc 2, is kind of about the PTSD of returning from war, which war is something they explore on 1 from And Justice for All. Some of these things we've seen before, but I think it feels very comprehensive of their entire body of work while still sounding consistent in its own right. And I think that that's quite an achievement, even if this album is admittedly a little bit spotty. Now, I've actually, as I've listened to this, and I've probably listened to this somewhere between 10 and 15 times now. I've listened to it a lot, and it's a long album, but I was listening to it, after it came out, like every freaking day for a while there. And at first, there were songs I really loved and songs that I just hated. But what I found is that the songs I hated at first have come up for me.
The exact same thing has happened to me. Yeah? I used to hate track 3 on disc 1.
Same here. That was me too. Yeah.
Now that we're dead, it's just to be frank, like this is pop. It's just pop rock. It's a simple, slower song. It has a very hooky chorus, and then it's just a hard left turn from everything that they've done. It's so well executed. Yes, it's far from being anything remotely original in 2016 or even for Metallica at this point, but it is so well executed. And after just the onslaught of Hardwired and Atlas Rise, which I got to talk about that here in a second. Yeah. It is a simplification that is needed at that point on the record, and it just hits a punt. It's perfect. It's right. Its placement is so perfect that I actually have ended up liking that song.
Me too. I never expected that I would.
Yeah.
I really didn't.
I remember like my first listen on this record complaining to you about how terrible that song was.
I didn't like it either. I was with you. And there were several other songs that are like that for me. Man Unkind, I really wasn't big on. Murder One, I wasn't really big on. Those have kind of come up for me now.
Man Unkind is actually a track pick for me.
Really?
I actually really, really like that song. It has that heavy march with a hint of major key in the verse.
Yeah.
Has a very solid chorus with that transitions between sections with this huge stomp on the drums and the big guitar riffs. Robert actually gets some songwriting credit in that song, which I really like. So, I'm a fan of that song. I think that there's a couple tracks in here that could just be cut.
I agree.
Murder One's one of those.
For me, one is Halo on Fire. It's a long track.
Totally agree with that.
It doesn't do a whole lot for me.
Yep.
And for a double album, I think they could have made this a single album. But where I'm at now is still very different than my first listen or two, because I would have cut many more songs that now I'm like, I like what this does for the album. Songs like Here Comes Revenge. I actually think the closing track, Spit Out the Bone, is a highlight as well.
I think it's great.
Really
Back to that thrashy roots.
Yeah.
I love it. It's a great way to end the album. I'm actually a fan of Am I Savage. It's just this chord grinding builder. It has a really nice groove to it. And it's honestly, its biggest fault is that it's too similar to several of the tracks that came earlier on the record, but that's not, like, if you just look at that song in isolation, it's a really, really well put together song. I don't know if I'd cut it.
Yeah.
So going back to Atlas Rise, track 2 on the first disc of Hardwired to Self-Destruct, I'm just going to come out on a limb and say this. This is the best rock song of 2016.
You think so?
This is a contender for me anyways. Best song of 2016.
Nice.
I think that this song
is a great one. It's a epitomal Metallica.
Oh, man.
They bring it home.
The James's performance is incredible. And the guitar melodies on this song blow my mind. It's so well done, well executed. Every single instrumental piece on this record is performing at its top notch. These guys crush it with this song. Its composition is complex, it's sprawling, it's all over the place. It's 6.5 minutes long. I mean, it's just an absolutely wonderful song. Has this great bridge, a great solo. And just frankly is just one of Metallica's best songs.
Yeah.
And not to mention where on Death Magnetic I really liked Broken, Beaten, Scarred. That song is mired in production issues because of the clipping. You don't have that on Atlas Rise. They actually handled the production throughout this record very well. It sounds very well produced. It's probably, next to Black Album, Metallica's best produced record.
Yeah,
this
sounds
one's really hard to find things that you can like make an honest complaint about. This record's a good record.
It is very good.
I don't think it's the best Metallica record by any sense of the imagination. I'd still rate it under Death Magnetic.
Barely.
In terms of what it achieves and its length. I think there's more justified material on Death Magnetic than there is this one. The production issues are minor, but the production here is a strength. I just feel like this all around is just a pretty solid record. If I were going to grade this one, I'd probably give it low 80s.
Yeah. I would agree with you. One thing I got to call out is this is the first Metallica album since Kill 'Em All to not have any Kirk Hammett writing credits.
And why is that?
It's because Kirk lost his phone in an airport, and apparently he had recorded hundreds of guitar riff ideas to his phone. Which, first off, back that shit up, Kirk, for the love of rock music.
This is the decade of cloud computing,
right.
Kirk.
Dude, you're killing me. You're killing me here to think that he'd lost. But second, you're Kirk Hammett. You're not telling me you can hammer out 100 great guitar riffs in a weekend?
Well, in their defense,
come on, man.
In their defense, a lot of the lead guitar on this record is still very strong.
Oh, and Kirk's solos are on point, man. He does great.
They are, comparatively to Death Magnetic in some of the soloing that Kirk did there.
Yeah.
This is a step down.
Yeah, I would agree.
But that is such a shitty complaint to make. The solos are still amazing on this record.
I think it's more about how they're setting him up for them. Like on Hardwired to Self-Destruct, I think that actually he does a little bit more when it comes to the style he's putting into the solo, some of the effects. We get some cool sleazy wah on here. I think Death Magnetic sets him up to just shred.
Yeah.
And some of the
Right.
technicality and melodic aspects of the solos on that album are incredible. But more just, you hear a lot of James' trademark guitar style or guitar songwriting style on this album because of that. And the guy is a riff machine. He comes up with great riffs. But what I like about what Kirk brings into the songwriting process is he's able to write riffs that are more lead focused, but also still kind of hooky. James Hetfield's guitar riffs are more focused on those chugging power chords with little bits in between, whereas Kirk can do more with just kind of sticking with the lead part. I think it's something that's always improved by variety, and I think it's a shame that Kirk's songwriting touch wasn't represented on here. But to their credit, they still pumped out a really good album from what they had. I mean, I don't think they really sacrificed all that much from it. I just think they sacrificed maybe a little bit of extra flavor that we saw on stuff like Injustice for All and Black Album and Death Magnetic that we didn't quite have here. But this is still, a really good album, and I'm not disappointed by it.
Yeah,
which
definitely
is great
wasn't a
to say
disappointment.
as a Metallica fan.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom,
Yes.
parting thoughts on Metallica?
Yes. So I want to tell a quick story. When I was at Pitchfork Music Festival this last July, there was a girl there who's wearing a hat that said, "Make Metallica Great Again." And I thought it was pretty funny, and I told her. And so I got to thinking, where would I like to see Metallica go from here? They put out Hardwired to Self-Destruct, which is really a good album. It's very all-encompassing of their career. Where do they go next? They can't just do another album like this or Death Magnetic. I think they've got to do something a little different. They've got to revitalize themselves even a little bit more. So what do they do? I think 3 things they could do to get even better. You're looking at me real skeptically, Jake. What? What's that look?
Keep going.
Okay, all right. So here's my 3-point plan of what? Of where I would like to see them go.
The political metaphors are
Just,
strong
just
in this
awful.
one.
Yeah, I know. First, stop making 75-minute long albums. And these are in order, by the way. That's the most important thing. I would even say cap yourself at an hour. That's still a freaking long album.
Yeah.
But you can do a lot in that time. I just think they've been getting overzealous since the early 90s.
Prioritize.
Right. Force yourself to trim it down. Cut your ego out of it a little bit. Yeah, I'm sure you love that extra song or two, but think about how you're serving the album. Point 2, I think as good as this album sounds, I would love to see them work with someone other than the Bob Rocks and Rick Rubins of the world. I would love to see them work with some up-and-coming metal producers. Whoever's working with Death Heaven or Baroness, getting the sound that those guys have. Mm-hmm. I would love to see Metallica have that kind of sound again and see how it could end up doing for them. And then point 3, I think they just need to work on collaborating a little bit more. I wish that Kirk Hammett and Robert Trujillo, Robert comes from a background of great bands, Infectious Grooves, Suicidal Tendencies. He's a great bass player. I'm sure he could contribute a little bit more to the songwriting process. If Lars and James didn't have such a domineering role in the band, I would love to see some more even collaboration and contribution from the rest of the band. I'd love to hear what an album with those 3 changes would sound like. What do you think? What do you think of that? Do you agree? Would you change any of that?
If they're going to continue to make more music,
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what they should do. I would agree with you 100%.
Okay.
But I would actually vote that they just hang it up here.
Just stop with this one.
This is a great album to go out on.
Yeah.
It's an ultimate fan pleaser. It's a double record. It
That's a
hits
good point.
It hits all ends of the spectrum from them. They finally put out an album that they can't possibly please their fans any more than what they did here. Everyone is just loving this thing who are Metallica fans. Metallica fans are just gushing over it for good reason.
Yeah.
There's stuff here for everybody. And while I don't love every track on this record, because I'd say I certainly pair much more with the old school 80s Metallica albums, and I love Death Magnetic. I'd prefer Death Magnetic to this record, obviously. But this is the album for every Metallica fan.
Yeah.
This is a great one to go out on. It's a thesis statement. It really is. So, at this point, rather than risking putting out a subpar record, why not just call it quits here?
Yeah. I could see that. There's, I think there's a lot to be said about ending your career on a high note, and that's certainly what they would be doing. I'd rather see that than see them put out a crappy album that just completely ruins what they've tried to rebuild with Death Magnetic in this one. But I like to think that there's more life left in them. But you know what? What I would want even more than a Metallica album is for them to tour again and come anywhere in the Midwest.
Great. And so this leads me into one of my parting questions.
Okay.
We're ending a deep dive, a very prolific deep dive here
Yes.
of Metallica, one of the best rock bands, best metal band of all time. How far, and this question obviously means more to Tom and I being from like rural Iowa than it would to be somebody that lives in like, the Northeast where you have concerts coming through all the time, right? But how far would you be willing to travel to see Metallica? And just by default, how far am I willing to travel to see Metallica? Because I'm going with you.
Yeah.
I'm not going with you.
I mean, it depends on, where all they're playing. I would go to Chicago. I don't know if I'd go too much farther than that because that just gets to be a pain.
Oh,
but you would?
Yeah, we'd go to Denver to see these guys.
Oh, I'd go to Denver.
I mean,
yeah,
if I can drive there in 12 hours, we're doing it.
Okay,
we're doing it, Tom.
If they play in Denver, I will go with you to that because we go to Denver sometimes, anyways.
I mean, if they play in Oklahoma City, we're going.
All right,
we're going.
You are much more dedicated than me. But admittedly, I've seen Metallica before. You gotta see them before.
I've never seen them.
They start right. You have to.
I've never seen them.
You have to be able
and I would
to.
have to see them with you.
Yes,
I would have to.
It has
You've
to
been
happen.
shoving Metallica down my throat for longer than I care to admit, and for the vast majority of that time, I hated it.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
I remember when you showed me Death Magnetic, I did not like it one
and
bit.
Now you understand
now
why I
love
was
it.
so excited coming off of Saint Anger when
Yeah.
that came out.
Yeah.
I was so giddy.
All right, last parting question.
Yeah.
And by the way, all of these parting questions, I really want you guys out there to answer these. How far would you be willing to travel? And top to bottom, letter grades for each Metallica record.
Letter grades.
And you got to do it quick.
Okay.
I don't want you to think too hard.
Master of Puppets A+.
A+.
And Justice for All A+. Yeah, I know you disagree with that one. Kill 'Em All A. Ride the Lightning A-. At that point, Black Album or Death Magnetic, I sometimes I like one, sometimes I like the other more. I'd probably give them both B+. From there, Hardwired to Self-Destruct, I'd probably give an even like B. Reload, I would give C to C+. Load, I'd give a C-, and let's say Saint Anger, I'd give a probably a D- too. I really hate that album.
D-.
Yeah.
D-. Not an F though.
It's bad. No, I won't give it an F because there are a few things I like about it, but yeah, that's where I'm landing.
All right.
Me. Yes.
Top
Hit
to
me
bottom.
with it.
Master of Puppets A+. I'm changing my answer and Ride the Lightning.
Yeah.
I'm giving it an A+.
A+.
But I'm rounding up. Like if Master of Puppets is a 100, Ride the Lightning 99, 98, somewhere in there.
All right.
Somewhere in there. And you know the tracks that bring it down just
I do.
that.
Yep.
You talked about that.
Yep.
After that, I think it's Kill 'Em All A-. Then I think you have to go with Black Album.
Yeah.
I think
Nice.
Black Album has to be after that, and I would also put that at like an A-. If Kill 'Em All, I'd probably give like 92, 93. Black Album, I'd probably give like an even 90. Then Death Magnetic, I'd probably go 88
Yeah.
on that. After that, I do Injustice for All.
Nice. All right.
Probably like an 84, 85.
Okay.
Kind of got mired in a couple issues that I think are a little bit unforgivable for giving it like a true A
For sure.
grade. Hardwired to Self-Destruct is the hardest one for me to place, and I think, as I said, 80 to 82, somewhere in there, so
Sure.
like a low B. And then, Reload, I'd probably give a C, 75-ish. Load, I'd probably give like a C-. I'm thinking like low 70s, and then Saint Anger's just so bad.
It's
D-.
real-
is
It's
just
real. It's
the way
real
it is.
bad.
So that's music nerddom to a T
Yeah,
right there.
for sure.
But everyone who's a true Metallica fan has thought of that question before. Like, how would you rank the albums? And I would love to hear what everyone's thoughts
got
are
different
on that.
stuff, but I think that's what you get when you have a band that just has so much good material, and especially diverse material that will cater to different listening audiences.
Right. So how far would you be willing to travel to see Metallica live? And rate your favorite Metallica albums top to bottom. This has been a very rewarding experience for me.
Yeah.
I feel like I have learned more and honestly never worked harder for Velocities of Music than I have in the past few weeks.
Yeah.
Just taking copious notes over these records as I'm listening to them, listening to just the amount of material that I had to listen to get familiar with these behemoth records.
Yeah.
It's just nuts how long these things are. And then having so many of them to get through. It was quite the effort. So I'm kind of glad to be done with several of these records, but I'm going to be coming back to many of them. And while you've been living them your entire life, this is like a whole new eye-opening experience for me. This has been a lot of fun.
It's cool to see.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you guys for your continued support and participation. Tom and I love all of your comments on our YouTube videos, your Facebook messages, and your emails to us. Your participation is what makes Velocities of Music possible, so as always, thank you for being awesome. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
We are Velocities of Music, moving music discussion forward.